There is a land at the southern edge of the Arabian Peninsula where history did not simply pass through but chose to settle. A place where incense once shaped global trade, where ancient kingdoms rose long before Rome dreamed of empire, and where mountains, deserts, and seas collide to create one of the most dramatic landscapes in the Middle East. And that land is Yemen, a country often reduced in modern headlines to conflict and collapse. Yet beneath those headlines lies a civilization so old, so layered, and so resilient that even centuries of invasion, neglect, and war have failed to erase its identity. Yemen is not merely a nation struggling in the present, but a living museum of human endurance, where stone skyscrapers built 1,000 years ago still stand, where poetry is spoken as naturally as conversation, where faith and tradition shape daily life, and where beauty survives even in the shadow of hardship. And this documentary is not about war alone, but about rediscovering a country the world has forgotten to truly see. A place whose story begins not with destruction, but with creation, trade, culture, and an unbreakable bond between people and land that has survived longer than most civilizations on Earth. To understand Yemen, one must look far beyond the images of conflict that dominate modern media, because Yemen's story stretches back over 3,000 years, making it one of the oldest, continuously inhabited regions in the world, a crossroads of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, where ancient trade routes carried frankincense, myrrh, gold, and ideas across continents, shaping global history in ways few people realize today geographically. Yemen occupies a unique position with fertile highlands, vast deserts, dramatic coastlines along the Red Sea and Arabian Sea, and isolated mountain villages that preserved traditions untouched by time. While culturally, Yemen developed its own architectural styles, social customs, music, dress, and poetry that remain distinct even within the Arab world. And religiously, it became a center of Islamic scholarship with deep roots in both Sunni and Zaydi Shia traditions. Coexisting for centuries in relative balance, this documentary journey will explore Yemen not as a failed state, but as a historic civilization facing modern challenges, examining how its past shaped its culture, how its landscapes shaped its people, and how its economy and faith continue to influence daily life even amid crisis. Because to truly understand Yemen is to understand how history, identity, and resilience intertwine in one of the world's most misunderstood countries. Long before Yemen became part of the Islamic world, it was home to powerful ancient kingdoms that controlled the most valuable trade networks of the ancient world, because incense, once as valuable as gold, flowed from Yemen's mountains and deserts to temples and palaces across Egypt, Rome, Persia, and India, enriching kingdoms such as Saba, Himyar, Qataban, and Hadramaut, whose wealth allowed them to build monumental dams, cities, and temples carved from stone, the most famous of which is the legendary Kingdom of Sheba, known in religious texts and historical records alike, and whose capital, Marib, housed an engineering marvel, the Great Marib Dam, that transformed the desert into farmland and supported a thriving civilization for centuries. These kingdoms developed advanced irrigation systems, writing systems, laws, and trade diplomacy, making Yemen one of the most sophisticated regions of the ancient world. And even after their decline due to environmental changes and shifting trade routes, their ruins still dot the Yemeni landscape, silent reminders that Yemen was once a global power, not a peripheral land, and that its people have ebb and long understood how to survive, adapt, and thrive in challenging environments. A lesson that remains painfully relevant today. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, Yemen was not conquered through overwhelming force, but embraced a new faith with a depth that would shape its identity for centuries, because the region already possessed strong traditions of monotheism, trade-based diplomacy, and scholarship, making it fertile ground for Islamic teachings to take root and evolve into uniquely Yemeni expressions of belief, governance, and social life. Yemen became one of the earliest regions to accept Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, and from that moment forward, it transformed into a center of religious learning, legal thought, and spiritual discourse, with mosques, schools, and scholarly networks spreading across its mountains and valleys. And unlike many other regions, Yemen developed a balance between different Islamic traditions, particularly Zaydi Shiism in the north and Sunni Islam in the south, a coexistence that lasted for centuries and shaped Yemen's political structures, social hierarchies, and cultural norms, while Sufi traditions flourished as well, emphasizing poetry, mysticism, and devotion, embedding faith deeply into everyday life rather than rigid ideology. And this religious diversity did not weaken Yemen's identity, but strengthened it, creating a culture where debate, scholarship, and spiritual expression were respected. And even today, despite conflict and division, religion in Yemen remains less about extremism and more about continuity, community, and survival in a land where faith has long served as both anchor and refuge. Yemen's religious landscape stands apart from much of the Middle East because of its ideas to what of a long-standing coexistence between Zaydi Shiism and Sunni Islam, a balance that shaped governance, law, and social norms for over 1,000 years and created a distinctly Yemeni approach to faith that emphasized moderation, scholarship, and local authority rather than centralized.
As Zaydi Islam, practiced primarily in northern Yemen, developed a legal and theological system closer to Sunni jurisprudence than to other Shia traditions, allowing for greater flexibility, debate, and community involvement, while Sunni Islam flourished in coastal and southern regions through trade connections with Africa, South Asia, and the wider Islamic world. And for centuries, these traditions coexisted without the deep sectarian violence seen elsewhere, because Yemeni identity often outweighed sectarian identity, with tribes, families, and local customs playing a greater role in daily life than religious labels alone. And even today, many Yemenis identify first by region or tribe rather than sect, though modern political conflicts have strained this historical balance, showing how external pressures and power struggles can distort traditions that once promoted coexistence. Yet beneath the surface, Yemen's religious culture still reflects a deep respect for knowledge, debate, and moral conduct, reminding us that religion in Yemen has historically been a unifying force rather than a dividing one. Yemeni culture is a living tapestry woven from history, geography, and tradition, expressed not through grand monuments alone, but through daily rituals, clothing, architecture, and social customs that have remained remarkably consistent over centuries. Because in Yemen, identity is carried in the way people dress in flowing robes and embroidered garments, in the curved jambia dagger, worn not as a weapon but as a symbol of honor and adulthood, in the intricate geometric patterns carved into wooden doors and stone homes, and in the slow, rhythmic pace of life shaped by both environment and tradition. While social gatherings revolve around storytelling, poetry, and communal chewing of khat, a practice deeply embedded in Yemeni social life that serves as a space for conversation, debate, and connection rather than mere recreation. And hospitality remains sacred, with guests treated with generosity even in times of scarcity, reflecting a cultural code older than the state itself, where dignity and reputation matter as much as material wealth. And despite modernization pressures and conflict, these cultural practices persist, providing continuity and identity for Yemenis navigating uncertainty, proving that culture is not something that exists only in museums or the past, but something lived daily, shaping how people endure, adapt, and hope in one of the world's most resilient societies. Yemen's landscape is one of the most dramatic and diverse in the Middle East, a land where towering green mountains rise sharply from arid deserts, where terraced farms cling to cliffs carved by centuries of human labor, and where coastlines stretch along both the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, creating a natural diversity that has shaped not only how Yemenis live, but how they think, trade, and survive. Because unlike much of the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen receives seasonal rainfall in its highlands, allowing agriculture to flourish in regions like Ib and Taiz, where coffee was once cultivated and exported across the world under the name mocha, while the eastern deserts of Hadramaut stretch endlessly toward Oman, hosting ancient caravan routes and isolated settlements that preserved culture through isolation rather than conquest. And along the coasts, port cities such as Aden became global trade hubs, connecting Africa, India, and the Middle East, turning Yemen into a gateway of civilizations rather than a frontier. And this geographic complexity meant that Yemen was never a single homogeneous entity, but a mosaic of regions, each with its own dialects, customs, and ways of life, unified not by ease, but by adaptation to some of the harshest yet most beautiful environments on Earth, making Yemen a country defined as much by its land as by its people. Yemen's architecture stands as one of the most visually striking and historically rich expressions of human settlement anywhere in the world, because long before modern engineering, Yemenis learned to build vertically, carving cities into mountainsides and raising multi-story homes from stone and mud brick that have endured earthquakes, floods, and centuries of use. Most famously in the old city of Sana'a, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where tower houses decorated with white gypsum patterns rise several stories high, creating a skyline that feels more like a living manuscript than a modern city, while cities such as Shibam in Hadramaut, often called the Manhattan of the desert, feature ancient mud brick skyscrapers built over 500 years ago to protect inhabitants from flooding and tribal conflict, proving that urban innovation existed long before modern steel and concrete, and these cities were not merely shelters, but social systems designed to reflect hierarchy, community, privacy, and climate adaptation, with narrow streets that provide shade, rooftop spaces for social gatherings, and windows positioned to balance light and insulation. And despite war damage and neglect, these cities still stand as symbols of Yemeni ingenuity, resilience, and aesthetic vision, offering travelers a glimpse into a world where architecture was not imposed on nature, but shaped in harmony with it. Yemen's rugged terrain did more than shape settlement patterns. It shaped the very character of its people, fostering strong tribal identities, local governance, and a deep sense of independence that has defined Yemeni society for centuries. Because when mountains isolate villages and deserts separate regions, centralized control becomes difficult, allowing tribes to develop their own systems of justice, leadership, and conflict resolution based on honor, reputation, and collective responsibility. And while outsiders often misunderstand tribalism as chaos, in Yemen it functioned as a social contract that maintained order, protected resources, and ensured survival in environments where state authority was distant or absent. And at the same time, Yemen's position along ancient trade routes meant that isolation coexisted with global connection, as merchants carried ideas, goods, and beliefs across borders, making Yemen both fiercely independent and deeply interconnected. And this dual identity, rooted yet outward-looking, remains visible today, influencing how Yemenis view authority, foreign intervention, and national identity, and helping explain why Yemen has resisted domination by empires and external powers throughout history. Because in a land shaped by mountains, deserts, and seas, resilience became culture, autonomy became tradition, and survival became a shared inheritance passed down through generations. Before modern conflict reshaped its fate, Yemen's economy was built not on vast oil wealth like its Gulf neighbors, but on adaptation, trade, and agriculture, rooted in centuries of experience surviving harsh environments. Because for much of its history, Yemen relied on farming terraced mountainsides to grow crops such as sorghum, millet, fruits, and coffee, the latter of which once made Yemen globally famous through the port of Mocha, giving the world a beverage whose name still carries Yemeni history, while trade through ports like Aden connected Yemen to Africa, India, and the wider Middle East, turning it into a commercial hub where goods, cultures, and ideas exchanged hands. And even after colonial influence and the decline of traditional trade routes, Yemenis continued to rely on small-scale commerce, fishing, remittances from abroad, and local markets, rather than centralized industry, which created an economy that was fragile but deeply human, driven by family networks and local resilience rather than corporate power. And though oil was discovered and exploited in the late 20th century, it never became a dominant force capable of transforming the entire country, leaving Yemen economically vulnerable but culturally grounded, a nation accustomed to making do with little and surviving through cooperation rather than abundance. The eruption of prolonged conflict shattered Yemen's already fragile economy, turning everyday survival into a constant struggle as infrastructure collapsed, trade routes were disrupted, currency devalued, and millions were pushed into poverty almost overnight. Because war does not only destroy buildings, it destroys trust, opportunity, and stability. And in Yemen, years of fighting have crippled ports, damaged farms, shut down factories, and disrupted education, leaving families dependent on humanitarian aid and informal economies to survive, while inflation made basic goods unaffordable and salaries for teachers, doctors, and civil servants went unpaid for years, forcing skilled professionals to abandon their roles or leave the country entirely. And yet, even amid collapse, Yemen's people adapted once again, creating local solutions such as community farming, barter systems, and informal trade networks that allowed villages and neighborhoods to endure when official systems failed. And this resilience, born of centuries of hardship, became the country's greatest economic resource, though the cost has been devastating, as generations grow up without stable education, healthcare, or opportunity. And the long-term consequences of this economic devastation will shape Yemen's future long after the fighting subsides. Today, Yemen stands at a crossroads between exhaustion and endurance. A country battered by years of war, yet still clinging to the cultural and social foundations that have sustained it for millennia. Because while ceasefires and diplomatic efforts offer moments of relief, daily life remains difficult for millions, with limited access to clean water, electricity, healthcare, and employment. And yet markets continue to operate. Children still attend improvised schools. Weddings are still celebrated. Poetry is still recited. And hospitality remains sacred, reminding the world that Yemen is not a failed civilization, but a wounded one, waiting for the chance to heal. And for travelers, scholars, and observers, Yemen represents not only a humanitarian crisis, but a powerful lesson in human resilience, showing how culture, faith, and community can preserve dignity even when systems collapse. And as the country looks toward an uncertain future, its greatest asset remains its people shaped by mountains, deserts, faith, and history, who carry within them a legacy far older than war, and a hope that one day Yemen will be known not for its suffering, but for the beauty, wisdom, and endurance that have always defined it. The relationship between Saudi Arabia and Yemen is one of the most complex, misunderstood, and emotionally charged relationships in the Middle East, shaped not by a single war or political decision, but by geography, history, tribal ties, and long-standing fears of instability spilling across borders, because Yemen and Saudi Arabia share not only a long border, but deep cultural, religious, and tribal connections that predate the modern states themselves. Yet this closeness has always been paired with imbalance, as Saudi Arabia emerged in the 20th century as a wealthy oil power, while Yemen remained poor, fragmented, and politically fragile, creating a dynamic where Riyadh viewed Yemen less as an equal neighbor and more as a potential source of instability that needed to be managed, influenced, or contained. And for decades, Saudi Arabia intervened indirectly in Yemeni politics through financial support, tribal alliances, and diplomatic pressure, seeking to prevent strong centralized rule in Yemen that might challenge Saudi interests, while also fearing the rise of hostile ideologies or foreign influence near its southern border. And when Yemen's internal conflict escalated into full-scale war in the 2010 seconds, Saudi Arabia framed its military intervention as a matter of national security, aiming to counter what it perceived as growing Iranian influence through the Houthi movement. Yet for Yemen, this intervention brought devastating consequences, intensifying destruction, humanitarian suffering, and long-term economic collapse, deepening resentment among Yemenis, who saw their country transformed into a battleground for regional power struggles. And today, despite diplomatic talks and reduced fighting, the relationship remains scarred by mistrust, grief, and unresolved wounds, standing as a tragic example of how neighboring nations tied by history and culture can become divided when fear, power, and geopolitics override shared humanity. To fully understand why Saudi Arabia and Yemen reached the point of open confrontation, one must look far beyond recent wars and examine a relationship shaped over centuries by porous borders, tribal loyalties, economic imbalance, and competing visions of power. Because long before modern nation-states existed, tribes moved freely across what would later become the Saudi-Yemeni border, sharing blood ties, trade routes, dialects, and religious traditions, meaning that separation was artificial rather than natural. And when Saudi Arabia consolidated as a kingdom in the early 20th century, while Yemen remained divided between imams, republicans, and later rival governments, Riyadh came to view Yemen as both a vulnerable neighbor and a strategic buffer, fearing that instability, revolution, or hostile ideology could easily spill northward. A fear reinforced during the Cold War when Yemen became a battleground for competing regional and global interests, prompting Saudi Arabia to fund factions, influence leaders, and quietly shape Yemeni politics to prevent the emergence of a strong, independent Yemen that might challenge Saudi dominance in the Arabian Peninsula. And this pattern of indirect control continued for decades, creating dependency rather than partnership, resentment rather than trust. And when the Houthi movement rose from Yemen's northern highlands, rooted in local grievances, economic marginalization, and Zaidi identity, Saudi Arabia interpreted its success not as a Yemeni political failure, but as a direct threat amplified by regional rivalries, leading Riyadh to intervene militarily in 2015 under the belief that quick force could restore order. Yet instead, the war exposed the limits of power, turning Yemen into a humanitarian catastrophe and Saudi Arabia into a deeply entangled actor in a conflict with no easy exit, revealing that borders drawn on maps cannot erase shared histories, nor can bombs resolve fears born of imbalance, mistrust, and unresolved coexistence. While political leaders, military strategists, and regional powers frame the Saudi-Yemen conflict in terms of security, influence, and balance of power, it is Yemen's civilian population that has paid the highest and most enduring price, because beneath every airstrike statistic and ceasefire negotiation lies the daily reality of families displaced from ancestral homes, children growing up without consistent education, and entire communities struggling to access food, water, and medical care in a country already among the poorest in the Arab world. And for millions of Yemenis, the war transformed life into a continuous calculation of survival, where hospitals operate with limited electricity, where malnutrition weakens entire generations, and where simple acts like traveling between towns become dangerous due to checkpoints, bombed roads, and shifting front lines. While Saudi Arabia's military campaign, though presented as a necessary intervention, intensified infrastructure destruction, damaging ports, airports, farms, and water systems essential for civilian life, deepening a humanitarian crisis that international aid organizations have repeatedly described as one of the worst in the modern era. And yet, Yemenis continue to display remarkable resilience, maintaining social bonds, cultural traditions, and mutual support networks even as systems collapse around them, revealing a tragic paradox at the heart of the conflict: that the people most affected by regional rivalries have the least influence over them, and that peace, when discussed in distant capitals, often feels abstract to those whose lives have been reduced to endurance, making the Saudi-Yemen conflict not only a geopolitical struggle, but a moral test of how power is exercised and whose lives are deemed expendable in the pursuit of security. Peace between Saudi Arabia and Yemen has proven painfully difficult, not because dialogue is impossible, but because the conflict is layered with decades of mistrust, unresolved grievances, and competing narratives that make compromise feel like surrender to all sides involved. Since for Saudi Arabia, the war is framed as a defensive necessity to secure its southern border and prevent hostile influence from taking root, while for many Yemenis, the same intervention is remembered as a period of devastation that deepens suffering rather than restoring stability, creating emotional and psychological scars that cannot be erased by ceasefires alone. And beyond official governments and movements lie complex tribal, regional, and ideological divisions within Yemen itself, where alliances shift, local power structures resist central authority, and no single actor can claim to represent the entire nation, making negotiations fragile and incomplete, while regional geopolitics further complicate peace efforts. As Yemen becomes entangled in broader rivalries that extend far beyond its borders, turning local grievances into proxy struggles that delay reconciliation. And yet, perhaps the greatest obstacle to peace is memory, because war embeds itself into collective identity, shaping how communities perceive threat, justice, and survival. And without genuine accountability, economic reconstruction, and acknowledgement of civilian suffering, peace risks becoming temporary silence rather than lasting resolution, meaning that true reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Yemen will require not only political agreements, but a fundamental reimagining of coexistence rooted in dignity, respect, and the recognition that stability cannot be imposed by force, but must be built through trust, patiently restored over time. Despite the deep wounds left by years of war, there remains a fragile but meaningful possibility that the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Yemen could evolve from one defined by dominance, fear, and intervention into one shaped by coexistence, reconstruction, and mutual stability, because history shows that no nation can achieve long-term security while its neighbor remains broken, impoverished, and trapped in perpetual crisis. And for Saudi Arabia, the lessons of the conflict have gradually become clearer, revealing that military superiority does not guarantee political solutions, and that lasting border security is more likely to come from a stable, economically functioning Yemen than from continued pressure or isolation, while for Yemen, the path forward depends on reclaiming sovereignty not only from foreign influence, but from internal fragmentation, rebuilding institutions that serve civilians rather than factions, and restoring trust among communities exhausted by conflict. And this future, though distant, could be built through sustained ceasefires, inclusive political dialogue, regional de-escalation, and long-term investment in infrastructure, education, and livelihoods that give Yemen's youth alternatives to war, extremism, and migration. And such a transformation would require Saudi Arabia to shift its role from enforcer to partner, recognizing Yemen not as a threat to be managed, but as a civilization with deep roots, dignity, and strategic importance. And for the wider region, peace between Saudi Arabia and Yemen would signal a broader shift away from proxy conflicts toward cooperation, showing that even the most painful relationships can be reshaped when power yields to wisdom and when survival gives way to shared responsibility for the future of the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen's story does not end in ruins, airstrikes, or headlines reduced to numbers and negotiations, because Yemen has never been merely a battlefield. It is a living memory of human endurance, a civilization older than conquest, older than borders, older than the wars imposed upon it. And even after years of destruction, famine, and silence, Yemen still breathes through its people, through farmers who coax life from shattered soil, through fishermen who return to the sea despite uncertainty, through children who learn hope in the absence of peace, and through elders who remember a country that once stood proud at the crossroads of the world. And this is why Yemen cannot be erased, controlled, or forgotten, no matter how long the conflict lasts, because wars may redraw maps, but they cannot erase identity, dignity, or the will to survive. And history has shown time and again that Yemen outlives empires, outlasts invaders, and absorbs suffering without surrendering its soul. And when the guns finally fall silent, it will not be the victors who define Yemen's future, but the people who endured it, who rebuilt with scarred hands and unbroken spirits, and who carried their culture, faith, and humanity through the darkest years, and for the world watching from afar, Yemen stands as both a warning and a lesson that power without understanding destroys, that intervention without responsibility deepens wounds, and that peace cannot be imposed from above, only grown from within. And one day, when Yemen rises again not as a pawn, not as a problem, but as a nation restored, it will remind history that resilience is the strongest force of all, and that even in the shadow of endless war, a people can still choose life, memory, and the long road back to dignity.